Hello and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Krissy Hawks, and I am here with my co-host, the creator and founder of Genetic Insights and the author of the Rejuvenate Blueprint, Elwin Robinson. And lovely listeners, please remember to hit that like and subscribe button and that bell icon so that you don't miss an episode. And also share this with those that you love and those that you know are like-minded individuals as yourself who are here and who would be interested in this podcast so that we can help optimize each one of us and get healthy to better. Get healthy to better. Get healthy together. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us. We are bringing you more answers to your questions that you lovingly put in the comments. So we'll start it straight off. I'll introduce Elwin. So Elwin, do you want to say hello to everybody that's joining us today?
Hey, happy to do another Q&A episode. I used to love listening to these back in the day of some of my favorite teachers, and I'm happy to see that they're actually pretty popular. So keep your questions coming. They may well feature in a future episode.
Fantastic. So let's get started here. So we are starting with a question from Cool5139. This is: the Holy Grail protocol must produce a lot of leptin because I feel constantly satiated on it. It's the weirdest thing, but I still have energy, but I don't get hungry. Is that leptin?
Yeah, that's a great question. Is it leptin? I'm not sure. And honestly, it's such a great question. I hadn't thought of that, even though I'm kind of obsessed with leptin and all these hormones in relation to weight at the moment, but I hadn't made that connection myself. EGCG is known to be at least a mild leptin sensitizer. Actually, I'm thinking maybe I'm getting a bit ahead. Just a quick recap of what we're talking about for viewers who are more sporadic. So Holy Grail, he's talking about, or she's talking about Jacob's protocol, as I often call it as well, or HG7 is otherwise known, that we've had Jacob on, I think by the time this comes out, 3 times to talk about his protocol. And so, a bunch of our viewers are at least aware of it, if not actually doing it. And this is like a experimental research protocol that is aiming to detoxify some metals while also replenishing some nutrients. That would be the simple way of looking at it. I think Jacob says it's more than that. It's like helping to, stimulate stem cell production and kind of rebuild your DNA and all kinds of amazing things, which he may well be right about. But anyway, so one of the other things that happens when you try this experimental formula, which I also noticed, and I actually asked Jacob about in the last interview, number 3, and which this person's talking about, is that you definitely feel less hungry when you do it, and you specifically feel less hungry after you do it. So I know for that reason, I'm pretty sure Jacob does it like the last meal of the day most of the time, but obviously some of us don't do that. It tends to interfere with sleep, I think, for a lot of people, including me, if you have it with a last meal. So I often have it like with a second meal. And I definitely find that the hunger is less. It takes me longer to be hungry, and I'm not the only one. Like when I said that to him, he laughed and said, yeah, that's absolutely the case for a lot of people. Could it be through the leptin mechanism? Yeah, zinc is very satiating. In fact, it's nausea-inducing if you have too much of it. And one of the amazing things about Jacob's protocol is, like from the perspective of another more frequent guest, Dr. Miriam, like that people can handle more zinc than they usually could, because usually people can only take so much zinc without it making them nauseous, frankly. So it's very much, I don't know if satiation is quite the right word, but it definitely reduces appetite. But green tea is so I think there might be a connection between zinc and leptin. I just don't know what it is. But green tea and EGCG, and of course we are taking green tea extracts, even though we're focused on the EGCG. Green tea is known to be a leptin sensitizer. And what is leptin? Leptin is the hormone that tells you that you're satiated. So this person's got this question, it's not only is it a good idea, but they've got all the details right. Yeah, leptin is the satiation hormone. Is it possible that with Jacob's protocol you feel more satiated because your leptin hormone, the one that tells you you're satiated, like the sensitivity to it is increasing in your receptors? I think yes. And if so, that's a really big deal, because our leptin's been severely dysregulated for lots of reasons. I've talked about this in more detail somewhere else, but especially the episode on the obesity epidemic and hormones. Definitely check that one out. That's one of my favorite episodes. So leptin's the satiation hormone. It's been dysregulated by all kinds of things, mainly just through living an unnatural lifestyle, specifically around light cycles, but also around artificial additives in food and various other things. And so, green tea is known to improve leptin sensitivity, but of course, the amount of green tea you normally take is not that much because there's this upper limit. So, as well as allowing you to have more zinc without nausea, Jacob's protocol seems, although it's experimental, also to facilitate you to have more EGCG without it causing a problem. In that episode, which should be out by the time this comes out, I share my test results, and I show that even despite having many times 10 times the recommended level of EGCG for liver safety, like all my liver enzymes were totally fine. Like there was no sign that it was causing any kind of problems with liver enzymes, or in fact with any other markers, or in fact with symptoms either. The opposite of anything. So is it possible that by taking so much green tea extract with Jacob's protocol, it's quite profoundly leptin sensitizing? It's possible. I don't know for sure if it's the case. The research hasn't been done. I guess we're doing the research, but certainly the clinical, scientific research hasn't been done. But anecdotally, it seems to. Absolutely. It's another very interesting benefit of the protocol, potentially. Another thing, so I was a bit concerned about this, as I mentioned in the interview with Jacob, because when I start eating less, when I go back to eating only 2 meals a day, I lose weight, and I don't like to lose weight. First of all, I look worse when I get thinner and thinner, and also I feel worse. I've talked about this before. Like, I acknowledge, I've admitted I have toxicities, for instance, lead toxicity, most commonly I've talked about. And it's possible that if I was like really pristine, then I would feel better, lower body fat. But we're living in a pretty toxic world, and I think most people do feel better with a little bit of body fat, not above the BMI in most cases, with a normal muscle mass level, but let's say within the BMI. So anyway, I didn't want to become really thin, so I didn't want to start eating less meals consistently. But funnily enough, I very rarely pay attention to my appearance. Krissy knows this about me as well. But I just caught myself in the mirror, and I was like, is that a six-pack? And I was like, my abdominal muscles were a bit more defined. And it's marginal. It wasn't like a very pronounced six-pack, but it's like a bit rather than not at all. And I was like, I haven't had that for a few years now, because basically the way to get a six-pack, it's not really sit-ups, it's just to reduce your body fat percentage. And at a certain low body fat percentage, it shines through pretty much, for men anyway. So I was like, oh, that's a sign I might have lost weight again. So I went on the scale, and I was actually heavier than I've ever been. So I haven't lost any muscle mass. I don't know if I've gained it particularly, or if it's a trick of the light or something, but at the very least, I do not look fatter. I do not look like I've gained body fat. Maybe even lost it while not losing weight, while eating less. So, for me, that's good. Obviously, for some people that's not appealing. They want to lose weight. I know that, Jacob, for instance, when he was on, he said his girlfriend, when she started, between her starting and now, he said she'd lost like 50 kilos of weight or something, and that's something that she wanted to have happen. So it varies, but I guess it's, again, a little bit more anecdotal evidence for Jacob's theory that people just kind of optimize their physique when they're doing this protocol, and that may be true.
Yeah, it's definitely, there are discoveries. I know you both, as you just mentioned, you've done your third episode together, and there's always things that you guys are finding through the research and through changing things up a little bit, and more knowledge coming to your forefront as you are investigating this theory with these 7 nutrients. So yeah, may more come with this as everybody's discovering. So yeah, absolutely great question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. And I will look into it more. Who was it who suggested that?
This was Cool 5139.
Okay. Don't know who that is, but great point.
And we're moving on to our next question, which comes from episode 26, which is the sugar is the only superfood episode. So there's a lot of questions you might find today from that episode. And this comes from Percy Purslane. Wouldn't the sugar diet be best for those of us who are past menopause and therefore don't have a lot of hormones left? And those of us who actually want to gain weight and muscle? Seems like fruits and carbs are best, plus they don't strain the kidneys.
Yeah, a few things there. I see what they're saying because, as I mentioned earlier, like going on a low-fat diet is particularly problematic for women. Women have a higher body fat percentage, and also just hormonally, it seems to not suit them to be really low fat more than men. Um, but if anything, your hormones kind of collapse post-menopause, and so that theory doesn't really make sense to me. If anything, you want to support hormones more post-menopause, not less. So I wouldn't personally go with that theory for that reason. What was the other bit about?
Yeah, so it's to the menopause, therefore you don't have a lot of hormones left. If we want to gain weight and muscle, seems like fruits and carbs are the best.
Okay, if you want to gain weight and muscle, seems like fruits and carbs are the best. A fruit diet is generally not associated with gaining muscle. I have to say that. We talked about the fruitarians last time. I actually put this in AI again, not because I expect it to be an arbiter of truth, but just I was interested to see what the mainstream perspective was. And I was like, what would you consider to be a stereotype of a fruitarian body type? And it it did its usual caveats of there's a wide range, blah, blah, which is true. But yeah, it's basically thin, very thin. That is, and did talk about, there was some studies, there was a study in raw veganism, for instance, that it cited where some people were fruitarian. And yeah, these are people near the bottom of the BMI range on average. Obviously, there's always exceptions. So a fruit diet, I do think or a heavy fruit diet, I do think relates to weight loss, unless it's really being counterbalanced by something else. I think the idea of having fruit plus a lot of dairy is interesting because dairy is pretty anabolic, and dairy makes up for quite a few of the nutritional shortfalls. I think I was saying quite a while ago in one of the episodes, like, in theory, I don't eat this diet at all, but in theory, I can see how, like, dairy and fruit is the most ethical diet if you don't want to kill anything, because literally even, vegetables don't want to be killed either. People have done research on that. Like, if you destroy part of a plant, it shows stress. Next time you show up, it's like nothing wants to be killed. But yeah, plants do want you to eat their fruits, and mammals do want their milk to be drunk. So, I mean, I know you're taking milk away from the calf or whatever, but there are a few farms in the UK, for instance, I found, who do, like, they leave the calf with the cow and they just take the excess, So I guess what I'm saying is it's possible to have 100% ethical dairy. It's possible to have 100% ethical fruit. And if you put those two together, that could be a reasonably anabolic diet. That is possible. But just like heavy fruit, and still, if you actually look at the people who are most focused on anabolism, who are most focused on putting on muscle, again, there are always outliers and exceptions, but generally the approach is lean meat and starch. That's what they like to do, not fruit. I don't know if it's something about whether it's like maltodextrin in those shakes, or whether it's, usually it's like boiled white rice and stuff like that they're going for, or sometimes potato. Like, I think there's something about fruit, about how, the fructose has to be processed by the liver and all the rest of it. It's just not as efficient, although I understand for that reason also doesn't spike the glycemic index as much. But yeah, I don't think for muscle. I think for weight loss and leanness, there is an argument to be made for the high fruit diet. So yeah.
Right. Well, good question. I mean, it's as well as we age, we definitely know things change. And it's not always easy to reach the body of your goals. So, yeah, it's one of those things for sure. So, yeah.
And I'm not sure if this will be the last episode, like the previous episode released, but the last Q&A I did, I did talk about why I have a theory about why, let's say, having 2,000 calories a day from sugar or honey, people tend to be more likely to become overweight, at least over time, versus eating, mangoes and kiwis and all the rest of it.
And here we go with another question from our listener. This is Ron. This comes from episode 68, and that was with Dr. Garrett Smith. He says, when I take 15 to 25 milligrams of zinc daily for a week or two, I start to develop shortness of breath, spoon, nail, rashes, cold hands and feet, and fatigue. Besides a copper deficiency, what else would be causing this?
Yeah, good question. One that I guess I have a bit more understanding of now than when he first made that comment. I don't know what I put back then, but I think the most obvious thing to me of that would be like heavy metals, that this person is overloaded with heavy metals, as a lot of people are. I think a lot more certainly than mainstream medicine recognizes, and that the zinc starts to get those heavy metals moving. And so that's my number one theory for it, especially with the specific symptoms that person listed. Another reason why a person could feel worse, even because that's a fairly small amount of zinc. Jacob's protocol aside, I have met loads of people who are like, say, 50 milligrams long term, no copper, and they just notice nothing. So this isn't necessarily a big deal. But yeah, another thing could be that zinc does speed up the enzyme alcohol dehydrogenase, but not so much aldehyde. And so this person could be suffering with overload of aldehydes. If they're already overloaded with aldehydes, which again, a portion of people are, Dr. Smith has done a lot of work kind of talking about this and recognizing it. I must say, when I first looked into it years before I discovered Dr. Smith, I also came to the conclusion that of all the different detox enzymes, it seemed to me aldehyde was the most problematic. Like, it could easily be a bottleneck to cause problems. And I recognize that there's probably a lot more people with an excess of aldehydes than realize it. But anyway, so zinc converts more other stuff into aldehydes, and aldehydes is like a step in the process of detoxification. So that could be another reason why a person feels bad having more zinc, other than copper deficiency. Those would be the two main culprits. With such a low amount of zinc, because that's really not much to supplement, having such a strong reaction would indicate it could be either of those or both or some combination as well, to create such a strong reaction.
Okay. I mean, zinc is one of those things that I'm learning more from listening to you and Jacob speak. Like, there's a push-pull. Things are coming and going with heavy metals and the different combinations of things as well. So, yeah, but most of us, or at least, seeing out there, hearing what I'm listening to what I'm hearing, is that many of us are actually quite deficient in zinc, aren't we?
This is again, like a fringe. I mean, okay, so the mainstream theory is that a reasonable amount of people are deficient in zinc. I think even the mainstream realizes this. But the more fringe theory is that actually loads of us are, but it's not easily detectable because it's a kind of like cellular, even genetic level. So it's not something picked up by any kind of blood test, whole blood, plasma, white blood cells, all the rest of it. Like, it's just not picked up because that's only showing you what's in circulation. So it's a really hard theory to prove or disprove in a strict empirical sense, unless you were to, I don't know, take a bunch of human beings and kind of liquidize them and just measure the zinc concentrations and correlate it with the health of the person, but not very ethical. So because of that, very valid ethical challenge in like objectively testing that, it's a lot of just speculation. So it's just a lot of speculation of some people on the fringes, and Jacob isn't the only one doing the even to some degree, although he doesn't do as much, like Dr. Walsh, who we did not feature, but we did an episode on his work. He talks about having a lot more zinc and how it can help with a lot of things. So a lot of people have kind of come to this conclusion independently, I would say, that having a lot more zinc than would normally be recommended seems to work for a bunch of different stuff. So I definitely think there's something to it. As to whether it's caused by deficiency or something else, like your body is just using up loads of zinc for a specific purpose. That's why I mentioned the heavy metal thing. Your body uses this zinc to create this metallothionein, which is otherwise mainly made out of amino acids. And so maybe the zinc is all being used up, but it's being used up to transport all these heavy metals out, which also are being underreported. And maybe it's some mechanism that I don't know or no one knows, but it just seems to be, yes, a lot of people, as long as they do it carefully and intelligently, get better and better when they take a lot more zinc than you'd think they'd need.
Okay. Yeah. So if that's for you, then definitely check it out and see if that works. And definitely take it on a full stomach. You do not want to take it without food.
Yeah. Yeah. If you feel, I don't actually know what it means if you feel fine having a large amount of zinc, say 100 milligrams on an empty stomach, and you don't feel sick. Um, from what I've seen, that might actually be a good sign. So don't think, oh, because I'm nauseous when I take zinc, that means I don't need it. Unfortunately, that's not the way it works. And in fact, it may be the opposite. You just, like Krissy just said, take it with food. Even even if you have a full meal for breakfast, which I hope you do, I encourage that a lot. Even having it with a full meal at breakfast can be more problematic. Like really having it later in the day, like when the whole system, maybe not even just the stomach, is as full of food as possible, for some reason, we seem to have less nausea that way.
Genetic Insights provides cutting-edge, affordable DNA testing, giving you access to over 500 health reports that can help you in 3 key ways. They may be able to resolve your existing health challenges even when nothing else has worked. Using simple lifestyle changes, their reports can help you reduce your risk of developing future health challenges that you may be genetically predisposed to. And they can help you feel more confident in your health by showing you where you are genetically strong. Unlike most other genetic health testing companies, Genetic Insights tests over 83 million different variations in your genes, guaranteeing 99.7% accuracy across all of their DNA reports. They cover almost every aspect of health, including digestive issues, cardiovascular health, weight loss, hormonal and blood sugar balance, as well as nutrient needs, allergies and intolerances, and so much more. Using their system is quick and easy, and reading the reports is simple. If you've done an Ancestry DNA test, you can simply download your raw DNA data, upload it to the Genetic Insights platform, and within a few hours you will have access to genetic reports which give you a risk score for each specific issue and scientifically validated recommendations based on your individual genetic profile. Everything in your reports are based on scientific studies, and there are citation links throughout every report. If you are serious about optimizing your health and wellness and feeling great, then getting access to your Genetic Insights reports may be the most important health investment you will ever make. In the reports, not only will you gain insights into how to overcome existing health challenges and avoid future issues, you'll also discover which types of dietary, lifestyle, and even supplement protocols are best for your unique genetics. To get your unique genetic health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and use code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today. That's geneticinsights.co using coupon code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today. Our next question is coming from episode 61. This is we were discussing Ray Peat's philosophy with Jay Feldman. So this is that episode, and this comes from Summer Salix. How would these diet recommendations change for someone without a colon? Now, the reason, because I know that, this is not necessarily something that's common and maybe you might not know much about, but I thought it has a validity in the sense of why I wanted to bring it up here in our Q&A, is in the sense that there are, and one of our friends, he's actually had part of his colon removed. So I wanted to discuss that with you. I mean, that people are going through some quite severe surgeries and things, and how do we cope overall?
Yeah, I had a boss many years ago who was in, I think, a car accident, and she had a substantial portion of small and large intestine removed. Yeah, I know it's not unheard of. Um, I can't remember Jay's specific dietary recommendations back then, to be honest, other than I think they're pretty similar to Ray Peat's, like milk and fruit and stuff like that. How would not I'm not an medical expert, so it's I can't really answer that question. But I don't think it changes it a huge amount, to be honest, is my understanding of it. From a mainstream medical point of view, the main thing that the large intestine does is it just dehydrates, like it takes the water out. It does do some other stuff. It also takes out some minerals, electrolytes specifically. Um, but you should be on top of all of that kind of stuff. Uh, I'm just thinking like a diet like Jay, so like, a decent amount of fruit is going to be high in potassium. That's probably going to be beneficial if you've got no large intestine, because you're probably going to need more. But yeah, I honestly just don't know, Krissy. That's something that a person, like, you have to whatever it is you're missing or that you have less of, you have to kind of find out what the consequences of those are, see what the mainstream recommendations are, not just necessarily follow the mainstream recommendations blindly, but try and understand the rationale behind them. So I don't know, but just for instance, they might tell you you've got to eat twice as much salt because your body doesn't absorb salt very well anymore. Okay, right? So then if someone's recommending a diet to you with no salt in because they think salt's bad, well, you need to calibrate that and go, well, that may be true for the average person, but it's less true for me than anyone because I need more or whatever. You just got to kind of calibrate it that way. So, but yeah, that's not particularly easy to do. So it's better to work with a practitioner usually, who really understands those medical issues. Yeah, not me. This is why usually when I work with people, I do partner with a medical doctor, and then we do some sessions where it's just the two of us. We discuss all non-medical issues, which, to be honest, usually is most of it eventually. But then we have someone we can check in for those medical things. And of course, just because someone's a medical doctor doesn't just mean that they suddenly understand the full gamut of everything that could go wrong in the body either. Although medical doctors are supposed to have at least an elementary grasp of that. But that's why there's all the specialties, right? So in turn, they may ask a gastroenterologist or whatever it might be. So I guess what I'm saying is this person must have had some recommendations at some point after having that removed. So just take those and intelligently apply them to what you're hearing from Jay or me or anyone else. And if that's difficult to do because it can be complicated, then you've got to go to someone who really gets it.
Great. Yeah. It's, you just think if how severely life changes, maybe it doesn't change so severely, but it's that thing of that not knowing. But I like your advice there. Definitely. You can take it further.
Again, I'm not an expert on this, but from my recollection, I would say um, the amount that you have to limit your diet as a result of having a substantial portion of intestine removed is probably less than like I voluntarily limit my diet, or a lot of people watching this voluntarily limit their diet. So you'd be surprised, Krissy. It's not as earth shaking. It's probably having a bunch of stuff that medical doctors don't even recognize, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, great questions. These are, thought-provoking for sure. Our next question comes from episode 26 again. So this is the sugar is a superfood. This comes from at Night Radar. What's your view on the claim of getting fatty liver from eating too much sugar? The sugar diet is intriguing me, but some of the proponents eat a heck of a lot of sugar.
Yeah, and if we're talking about white sugar, like refined sugar, or even brown sugar, or arguably, honey, maple syrup, very concentrated sugar, um, I think it potentially could lead to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease eventually. Yes.
And why
Not in a
is that? Well, I mean, what
not
is
in a
the
one-to-one
process?
ratio. Not like everyone who does it will definitely get it, but it, even smoking, like not everyone who smokes for 50 years gets lung cancer. The correlation's pretty high, but it's not, it's definitely not a definite. I believe the majority of people who smoke their whole lives don't get lung cancer. So it's still, so ditto. I'm pretty sure the majority of people who ate sugar all day, every day still wouldn't get fatty liver disease. But yeah, I think it would raise the risk significantly, honestly. Why? So fructose, as much as people talk about its benefits, which are valid to some degree, so it really is a significant lower glycemic index, which really does put less of the strain on the pancreas, and also the adrenals, because the pancreas kind of has to create the insulin to clear the sugar if it's too high, and then the adrenals have to kind of boost the sugar again if the sugar gets too low, which commonly happens if it gets too high, because it's like a roller coaster. And there's more to it than that, but that's a simplified version. So all of that, and that insulin pancreas thing is a big deal. It doesn't just even lead to type 2 diabetes. It's a significant contributor to Alzheimer's, a significant contributor to cardiovascular disease. So it is a really big deal that it does that, but it's not like there is no downside to having it go through the liver, and it is a strain on the liver. And if you have a very large amount, and especially if it is devoid of the nutrients that come with it, in the case of like a white sugar versus diet full of cherries and whatever, peaches, then it is more likely to cause a strain on the liver over time, especially if a person has a genetic susceptibility for it, or especially if they have other things in their environment or history that would, for instance, if you've been an alcoholic for 20 years and now you're a sugar eater, like you may not have fatty liver disease yet, but the fact that you've been an alcoholic for 20 years and now you're flipping to eating a kilo of sugar a day or whatever, maybe that's not realistic, a pound of sugar every day, it's just another stress on your liver when it's excessive.
What would be the indicator of somebody, for them to know that they are getting a fatty liver? Like what in the blood test or what in something like that would they then go, oh shoot, I need to change directions?
Yeah, the blood test is easy. It's all the classic, liver markers that even a mainstream doctor would test. If any of them are raised, that starts to indicate it. Even before that, I guess like elevated cholesterol is a sign of it. LDL cholesterol, stuff like that. Signs of oxidative stress, HSCRP. In terms of how you feel, I guess it's all the usual symptoms that could be so many other things. But one of the things that's kind of like a swelling around the upper abdomen is like the liver can literally become twice the size. So that's something that may be noticeable. People often get a kind of red hue, but trying to think of anything that couldn't also be something else, and I'm struggling. Like that's where tests really are better.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's good. But the liver does regenerate, doesn't it?
It can, but does it? Yeah. No, you're right. It's a good point. Like if you damage the kidneys, they don't regenerate. It's very difficult. The liver is much more resilient. And often, if you just stop overloading it, it will regenerate. Absolutely. But people don't realize, like as the example I gave, right? You may have spent 20 years doing all kinds of drugs and alcohol and all the rest of it, and then you go on the high sugar diet because you think that's pure or whatever, or you're on the keto diet or whatever it might be, and maybe you're still kind of stressing your liver, without realizing it in other more subtle ways. So, but yeah, if you're genuinely not stressing your liver, then it will regenerate. And lower liver enzymes are no guarantee that the liver is fine. But if the liver enzymes were high and then they become low, that is a good indicator that your liver is getting better. So it's not that it's better as in like all better now, but better as in not as bad as before. It is a good indicator of it. So yeah, again, I would test that, and it's such a simple, quick, cheap test. I don't think there's a home finger prick one for that yet, but it is like very, very low cost test you can get a doctor to do or do yourself privately.
Great. Okay. And yeah, again, going back to the validity of testing and taking a look and seeing where you're at. This next question comes from episode 30. This is the bioidentical hormone therapy pros and cons. It comes from BJJ Ritchie. Does research promote pregnenolone increasing estrogen?
I believe it does in certain instances, and those instances are basically so basically pregnenolone is it has its own functions, but for the purposes of this conversation, we can just look at it as a raw material that your body could make loads of other stuff out of. And so in terms of what it decides to make out of it, it's not necessarily going to create the optimal amount of each hormone. It's going to create the levels based on all the triggers that are telling it. So basically, for example, the more body fat you have, the more your body will create estrogen. So yes, if you are very obese with a lot of body fat, your body would be more likely to convert the pregnenolone into estrogen than if you were not, if you had a high ratio of muscle to fat. That's just the way it is. Ditto, as Ray Peat talks about, if you're very inflamed, and highly stressed as an organism. So not necessarily like you might not be highly stressed, like you might not realize you're stressed, but if your body is struggling, basically, which is something you might be able to get a sense of from blood tests or maybe from like biofeedback devices like we talked about recently. If you're if there's like things like that showing that your body is struggling, then yeah, you'd be more likely to convert it into estrogen, all other factors being equal. But of course, if you're a woman, that's more likely to happen than if you're a man, except for if you've gone through the menopause. But even then, it's kind of arguable. There's definitely less estrogen being generated after menopause, but it's arguable to me because I think there's still more tissue estrogen than is commonly recognized. So yes, basically short answer, yes, it absolutely could be.
Okay, yeah, good to know. Good to know. Our next question comes again from episode 26. That's a popular episode. And this one comes from Classic Jukebox Band. Ray Peat killed himself by following his own advice. Now, give me the excuses why it wasn't sugar that killed him, just like the vegetarian idiots did when McDougall killed himself with his diet. It's an interesting one.
How old was he when he died, Krissy? I think it's 86.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Look it up.
And what's the average age of death in, we could say either the US or Mexico? Because he was born in the US, but I think he lived a substantial portion of his life in Mexico.
Roughly around 70, 73. So he was 86, but yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know what people expect. This is someone who had health problems his whole life. That's why he got into all this stuff. And he was not, I don't think he had perfect health ever. And he seemed to kind of still be sensitive to some stuff some of the time. He was not like, Mr. I can just do whatever I want and I'll be fine. But yeah, he started off with health problems. He resolved most or all of them. And he lived 10 to 15 years longer than most people do, despite all of that. I mean, yeah, what more do people... I mean, it'd be nice if he lived 150. That would definitely prove his theory, obviously. But the idea that someone killed themselves with their diet when they live 10 to 15 years longer than the statistical average is, I think, like, just silly.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you say, too, especially if they've got some things that they need to sort out. They've not been optimal all the way through. So there have been some things that they've had to figure out. They've got better. But yeah, 86 is pretty good innings. I mean, that's, yeah. It's doing all right.
I think if you died at like 66, you could just about make the argument. Even then, you could make excuses, but then maybe it is excuses. But with 86, I'm not going to make excuses. I'm just going to point out how kind of nonsensical your argument is.
Well, but thanks for the question. Our next one comes from...
I'd say that wasn't a question. That was just like a snarky attack on someone who, although I don't follow a lot of his principles, I think had a lot of wisdom in some senses, and was a pioneer and was willing to say things that no one else had the courage to say. And has been proven right about at least some stuff, in my view, like seed oils, and some stuff like thyroid that he wasn't the first to say, but he really banged that drum, even though it's very, not very popular. And progesterone, I'd say he was not the very first, but definitely one of the pioneers of, and all the rest of it. And in the last couple of decades, it's been recognized how important bioidentical hormones are, and et cetera, et cetera. And so I know, like, even the forum we reference a few times because Jacob's on there, the low toxin forum. It used to be the Ray Peat forum, and I was thinking about this earlier. I was like, I think there's a lot of people criticizing the owner of that forum for changing the theme, the direction of it. But in the end, and I understand it's for the people who strictly want to stay with the Ray Peat method, it may be annoying to have the kind of community the community meeting place that you're used to kind of, it seems to be taken out from underneath you. But in the end, I respect the owner for doing that because, you know, what's worse? Like, if you truly don't believe in something anymore, is it worse to change that thing, or is it worse to just stick with it and carry on making money out of it, or whatever he gets out of it? I'm not even sure if it's money. Promoting something that you don't really believe in anymore. I think it's the ethical thing to do, even if it's annoying for someone who still does believe in that system. But the ethical thing to do is to switch it to the thing that you believe in. And so why am I talking about that? Well, it just goes back to the Ray Peat thing. At least, he ethically talks about what he believed in, right or wrong, whether it was popular or in many cases unpopular. And so you have to respect someone for that.
No, absolutely. And things are always changing and evolving as well as time goes on. It's and you've got to follow what's, like you say, what's right for you and move forward in that direction. And along the way you will upset some people. That's just the nature of life.
And to address that person's point, look, might he have lived a few years longer if he didn't have sugar? Maybe. That may be true, but I don't think it really takes away massively from him.
Yeah. Good point. Our next question comes from a clip actually that went out. I'm not exactly sure the full episode. This comes from Guy6331. What is your view of N-Acetyl L-Tyrosine versus standard L-Tyrosine?
Yeah. So acetyl, by the way, just means kind of vinegar. I mean, it's not quite, but it's acetic acid. But that's not to minimize it. I mean, part of the Krebs cycle is acetate, and there's acetate created in your intestines by different bacteria and all the rest of it. But I'm just trying to say that's kind of all it is.
Yeah, I was going to say what varies it, and why would you choose one over the other? But what's your view?
The view is, I believe that it lasts longer. It's either that or that it's better absorbed, but I'm pretty sure with that one, the idea is it lasts longer because it's bound to the acetate, like it's not broken down as quickly. I might have got that wrong. Sorry, it's been a long time. But in either case, there's something about it that's supposed to be superior. I found no difference, honestly, with it. And it costs more.
I was going to say, is there a cost perspective there? So.
Oh, yeah, always. And the taste, like, it's more sour. Like tyrosine on its own, if you just put it on your tongue, is kind of a mild, sweetish taste. N-Acetyl L-Tyrosine definitely has more of a sour taste to it. So that's probably the only reason I'd use it, is if I want to add something to my food and have it be more sour. But I've not found any better uptake, use, effect. No, personally.
Okay. All right. The next question comes from episode 112, which was, a recent one we've just done. The number one most effective supplement for insulin, gut, liver, neuropathy, detox, and more. And this question comes from Freeman75. Would you recommend taking EGCG on its own or as part of the HG7 protocol?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so got to distinguish there. First of all, I don't recommend the HG7 protocol to anyone. The reason why I feature it is because it may be great, but it's a research project. And to share my own experiences. People are obviously interested. I keep getting people asking how it's going and stuff. So now, if the question is, do I recommend very high doses of EGCG outside of Jacob's protocol? No, I do not. I never played around with high doses before I discovered Jacob's protocol, but the consensus is that it can cause liver damage if it's over, a fairly moderate amount, like 400 milligrams is usually what they say. That's obviously, well, maybe not as obvious, but that is, to clarify, in people who are very susceptible to liver damage. So it's not like it's necessarily going to cause that problem for everyone. But the way these things usually work, actually, did I do this rant before? I think I did actually in another episode. But I'll just quickly remind people then about this idea that I have, which is basically most of the time, medications are overdosed and supplements are underdosed. And that's a lot of it is to do with the liability around them. So basically with medications, the number one goal is to kind of prove that they work. And then there's a lot of kind of legal infrastructure in place to kind of basically, if you put the side effect on your little warning pack that goes in the packet, then you can't be sued for it. I think it's a general idea, although I believe there are exceptions to that. And so that's why there's always a huge list of side effects. They're just kind of trying to cover everything that's ever been found so that they're not liable for it. Now, with supplements, we can't do that. So we can't just sell you something and go, oh, yeah, by the way, here's a list this big of all the problems it could create, including horrific problems, but you're just going to take it anyway because you're not even reading it, you're just kind of ignoring it. So people like you, people watching this kind of thing, people on the kind of forums we just mentioned earlier, they're probably the exception. But the average person doesn't even look at that huge long list of things, and then they just take the ibuprofen or whatever anyway, even though it really is pretty dangerous. Statistically overall compared to a lot of other things. Now with supplements, people do the exact opposite, and I especially notice this with mainstream people. Like they will pop, paracetamol and antacids and all the rest of it, and then if it's a supplement, oh, is it safe? Is it safe? Like it's like it's so much safer. It's so much safer than what you're already doing. No, it's not totally safe. Absolutely, there are risks always, but it's so much safer than what you're really doing. But that's, there's a significant percentage portion of the population that just is very influenced by authority and social proof. And so they basically go, does the government or whatever say that it's safe enough? Yes. Is everyone else around me doing it? Yes. Case closed to them. So that's how they work. But it's also the corollary is the opposite. They're like, does the government say it's safe? Nope. Government either has no opinion on supplements or it may be negative. Are most people around me doing it? Nope. Supplements are nowhere near as widespread. So, okay, then it's no good. So that's really, the criteria that they specifically use on it. So do I think, 600 milligrams of EGCG is as dangerous as, taking the whatever the maximum recommended amount is of paracetamol a day? I think it's 2 grams, something like that. 250 milligram tablets is usually. No, I personally don't think that's anywhere near as dangerous. Personal opinion, but I'm not making that recommendation. And also, I do think there is an other opposite extreme of people maybe much less of the population, but people who I meet who are the exact opposite, who basically go, if it's a medication, if it's made by a pharmaceutical company, then it's evil and I can never touch it. And if it's natural and from the ground, then it's totally safe and it's fine. Also false, right? First of all, a lot of medications I think over 70% of medications are derived from plants. So even though maybe now they're synthesized with petrochemicals or whatever, chemically it's identical to what is found in plants. And then second of all, just because it grows from the ground does not mean it's safe at all. So there's the kind of extremes, and the thing is the truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle. But just to point out, supplements generally by everyone that the risks are overhyped and then medications are underhyped as a generality with those exceptions. And so with EGCG, I would not recommend someone does more than that amount, 400 milligrams. But it's really not very much. That's like 2 or 3 cups of green tea a day. That's my understanding. And so, how many people do you know who drink, more than that of coffee or normal brown tea? Probably loads. Is green tea that much more dangerous than those? I'm skeptical about that even. So, I personally wouldn't do it. I also wouldn't drink any more 10 cups of coffee a day, although I used to. I think even in the lower levels, it's been shown to have significant benefits. I guess maybe all of that is very theoretical. So to get to a practical conclusion, yes, if you don't want to do Jacob's formula, which I completely respect because it is experimental, doing a moderate amount of EGCG equivalent to a couple of cups a day, 300 to 400 milligrams, I still see a ton of benefits, which is why I featured it on its own in that episode.
And would it be something like, as we talked about, like with that kind of supplement that you would take a break from just to give your body, it's not something that you would do constantly, consistently for a long time?
It's a great point. People often don't, just like, people tend to drink green tea, drink it every day for decades. But yeah, that's always a better idea of anything, especially liver toxic, Krissy. It's a great thought. Absolutely taking a break from it because of what you just said about the liver regenerating, because of what you said earlier. That is a way of making it even safer. Absolutely.
Fantastic questions. I'm loving this. You guys are great. Thank you for bringing them. We've got a few
These
more.
are some really smart questions. Yeah.
Really, really great. The next question again comes from another clip, which are great to see those going out there and people interacting with them. So the clip was why D-mannose is worth trying for UTIs and bladder infections. And the question comes from Susan Stewart, 1402. My UTI symptoms with negative test results turned out to be symptoms of excess vitamin A and carotenoids. It's worth looking into. Between plant-based diets and egg and organ meat paleo, most of us are probably in excess. Now, I know this isn't a question, but I know that there are many, many people out there that do suffer from a lot of UTIs or that have that constant irritation and thinking it's the UTI. So, in your space that you've come along, have you ever come across this where it being an excess of vitamin A, carotenoids, or is that something that you've heard about?
Not a huge amount, but there are definitely some people in those communities who talk about that and say it got better. It's not the first time I heard it, but it's not the 10th either. It's somewhere in the middle. I think it makes sense theoretically, because of that mechanism that Grant Generu, who's also been a guest, specifically talked about how in order to detoxify, retinol, the active form of vitamin A, it kind of at some point turns to retinoic acid, and the way he describes it is it's used for the skin because it's basically, they say it's stem cell increasing, which is true, but it does that because what else is stem cell increasing? Taking a lighter to your wrist and burning yourself, like that also increases stem cell production. So basically, stem cells production increases in response to damage, and so it's kind of similar to a chemical peel, I guess, as a concept.
Yeah, like when they do that laser resurfacing or chemical peel, those things like that. Right. So they're doing it through damage. And I've never thought about it like that.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that it's more focused on the intestines, how leaky gut and things like that, because the retinoic acid is burning and potentially damaging in the intestines. But could that also have sorry, two thoughts at once there. Could that also have an impact where it damages the urethra? Absolutely, because the conversion, so retinol, which is normal vitamin A. So there's beta carotene, which is a plant source, but it's kind of not really vitamin A yet. Then mammals, including humans, turn it into retinol. Then it can be stored as a fatty ester, but we'll leave that aside for a second. In terms of the detoxification, so ol is an alcohol, then it gets turned into retinal, which is an aldehyde, and then it gets returned into retinoic acid, which obviously is an acid. And the flip so retinol is like a fat. I'm pretty sure retinal is a fat, but the flip from the retinoic acid turns it into something water soluble. So I guess what I'm saying is, at that point, it would make sense it would also go out through the kidneys and the bladder. So yes, it's not inconceivable to me that if you would, especially if your body was good at converting vitamin A into retinoic acid, but you had a lot of it, that it could burn the urethra on the way out. Absolutely.
Yeah, I never thought. That's a really, really great parallel of bringing it together, thinking about it. Yeah, if your body is converting that, then no wonder it's going to have that sensation as it exits. But then it's not necessarily, it's the bacteria, but then we go thinking it is the bacteria when it's actually this other substance that is proving to damage our body internally. Something to think about.
Absolutely. I mean, I did 6 months of zero, or close to zero, whatever, vitamin A. I didn't notice a huge amount of difference. Although some things got a bit better.
Like what?
I don't remember. I
Yeah.
don't remember sticking with it. It was too long ago, but it wasn't enough that I remembered. Like, I remember it was enough that I didn't immediately stop or anything. But yeah, really not that much, I would say. And that's to be expected because that was like the argument is that it takes a long time to get it out, which makes sense because it's fat soluble vitamin. And I was definitely convinced by that experience that the idea that it is this essential nutrient that you have to keep taking every day, otherwise within 2 months you end up deficient, is a complete lie. Because I've seen myself 6 years and my blood levels started high and they ended high. Like it made no difference. And so I can't even imagine how long you'd have to do until they actually got really low. And, if you believe, obviously, Grant, which I do, like it took him well over 5 years, I think, before his levels even got low. And now he's done it for over 10 years and he says he still feels better than ever. So I'm pretty convinced by that. I'm not as convinced that, I asked these questions when I had Grant on the second time, that just only limiting that is all you need to do. And even if it is true, it seems to be very slow. So doing things to speed things up and doing things to kind of make yourself feel okay along the way while you're still suffering with UTIs or whatever it might be, I think are very appropriate. But of course, I'm also really into finding root causes. And for some people, it definitely can be a root cause that their body's overloaded with it. So people say, oh, well, it's not that. It's because you're hypothyroid. That's why your body is building up the vitamin A. Some people say, oh, it's because you're zinc deficient. That's why your body's building up the vitamin A. Some people say whatever. But the point is, okay, but whatever it is, like it seems to be a thing. So while I resolve that, does it make sense to have less? Yeah. The only reason I have some vitamin A is because I do well with dairy and I need the calcium because I have lead toxicity and I think for other reasons as well. So I still have dairy, but I do not supplement vitamin A. I don't eat like carrots or any of these things. Otherwise I would. So I'm reasonably, convinced by it. And also, I think if someone is healthy enough, a carrot is not going to hurt them either. But I can see, I actually knew someone who, no, I didn't. I think I met them, but anyway, when I was young, my grandparents, one of their friends was this person who basically only ate carrots, and I would always hear about their progress. I think I met them, um, and yeah, they became like orange and very sick. It was my grandparents always talking about like the dangers of vegetarianism, but of course it wasn't vegetarianism, it was carrotism.
Carrots.
That's pretty much all they were having. But yeah, it made them very sick. And there are, that's anecdotal, but there's various different examples where people do like crazy high vitamin A diets, not necessarily polar bear level, but yeah, just like literally just carrots. There's a few examples of that. And it doesn't do well for them. It's not just that they're missing the vitamins, they really seem to get overloaded with this thing. And so it might have been overhyped. It might be just another toxic insult, but it could be that final straw insult that really is too much for you. And when you then reduce it, you feel a lot better. And I believe the people who have had that experience as well, at least some of them. So I think it's another toxin, and it might be the straw that broke the camel's back. And so that's my personal view on it. Could it be that it's a toxin stroke nutrient, like, it's true with copper or iron or, various other things that we've talked about recently? That is possible to me. But it's like, even if your body needs it, you just want to assess where you're at with it. If you definitely have too much, then like reducing is a good idea. And yeah, when you have these unexplained symptoms, I know with UTIs, you go to a doctor and then, they give antibiotics, it doesn't work. And eventually they go, you've got cystitis. And what does that mean? It means you have an inflamed bladder and we don't know why. And tough luck. And so then, yeah, it's worth trying all these other fringe theories. It could be vitamin A. Obviously, it wasn't this person's case, so it's great for them that they worked that out if it worked. But it could be all kinds of other toxins. I guess that's the point. Any toxin that's significantly excreted through the bladder, if it has a corrosive quality to it, which not all of them do, but quite a few of them do, that could also be it.
Yeah, great point. Because most of us, I know for me, I've always gone to, oh, it's a bacterial infection. But understanding this and knowing the process and knowing that there are other things that could be irritants or, as you just said, corrosive to the bladder, to the lining, to all of that, then it's like taking that other look and actually saying, okay, if it's not that, what else could it possibly be? Yeah.
Yeah, and they're not mutually exclusive terms. I think the communities that we've had on recently, just in general, I think since we started, they tend to focus more on the toxins over infections. And that's fine. And not all of them, but some of them, a lot of them. And that's fine because I think it's correct. It's more of a root cause. I've said this before. They're both part of my 7 Rejuvenate blueprint, 7 root causes of all chronic disease. They're both there. I do think the toxins are more, but they're interrelated. Like, for instance, the stomach ulcer thing, for many decades, it's thought by the medical community to just be stress, because of the correlation that they saw. And also because they thought it can't be an infection because nothing can exist in the stomach because it's so acidic. Then they discovered H. pylori, and now they're like, oh, it's H. pylori. But then they don't ask the question, like, why is H. pylori actually commonly in the gut and then in the stomach, and only some people have stomach ulcers, right? And then also, like, why is there such a high correlation between nickel toxicity? So that's another toxin behind it, and then having stomach ulcers and having H. pylori infections. Like, they all kind of go together. So, the medical community would be like, oh, just take antibiotics to get rid of the H. pylori if it flares up. A lot of these mineral people would be like, oh, you just need to resolve the underlying mineral imbalance. But I would always say, well, why not do both? Why not treat the thing, including the infection, and then work on the underlying toxicity that may be facilitating the recurring infection if it does keep coming back. But sometimes it doesn't keep coming back. Sometimes you have an infection and you just have a rest, or you take an antibiotic, or you take some kind of herbal anti-pathogen, and it doesn't come back. And then you could say, it's probably more just an infection, maybe because I was temporarily weakened. But if it keeps recurring, like we talked about, if you kept getting colds when you're traveling, Krissy, then it's like, okay, there's probably something underneath it. Let's see what's going on. But it's not always a toxicity. It could be something else.
In an ideal world, you'd meet all of your nutritional needs in the form of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and more from the foods you eat. However, unless you prepare all of your food at home from scratch using the highest quality ingredients possible, the reality is that most of us need some nutritional support. Most of us need to take supplements if we want to look, feel, and perform at our best on a consistent daily basis. And this is especially true if you have genes that give you an elevated need of certain nutrients. And this is where Feel Younger can help. What I love about Feel Younger is that they offer a huge range of quality supplements and healthcare products formulated and endorsed by Elwin Robinson, including must-haves like magnesium glycinate and vitamins B12, D3, and K2. And they do it at affordable prices with free shipping for orders over $50 without ever compromising on quality, purity, or potency. To learn more about how Feel Younger supplements can give your health a boost while supporting this podcast, please visit feelyounger.net and use promo code Rejuvenate to get 20% off your first order. That's promo code Rejuvenate for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. Our next question comes from episode 71. This is the Korean 8 Constitution Diet. And the question comes from Jessica Garrow, J4L. Sorry, that might be an I, but just forgive me, Jessica. The question is, super interesting, although hard to tell which one I am. Also, a couple of those resources list conflicting foods for some of the same types. I have a few genes that say that I tend to not process saturated fats well, and that keto may cause insulin resistance and high blood pressure. Do you think those could be clues to a type?
Yeah. The type that famously doesn't do well with saturated fats is that Korean system. And this is a Korean system that kind of talks about different types, but it's not kind of based on kind of arbitrary things like your date of birth or whatever. It's based on kind of constitutional thing, like you inherited it from one of your two parents, and it's based on the relative size and strength of function of some key organs. So for instance, some people have big stomachs that produce lots of acid, some people have smaller stomachs that produce less acid. So that's it in a nutshell. Yeah, I mean, saturated fats, problem with saturated fats is probably most indicated for the lung types, the pulmotonia and the colonatonia. So that would be the most obvious thing. The insulin resistance, blood sugar issues, that's more indicated for like the pancreatonia types. But honestly, a lot of different people have that. So I put it more like as the lung type. And honestly, if you there's quite a few lung types in the general population, but if you look at the amount of lung types within the alternative health community, who would not just watch my channel, but any channel on health, you're going to find a lot of lung types because the modern environment and modern food supply is pretty tough for lung types. Lung types used to do a lot better. There used to be less nutrients, less toxins, less calorie dense foods, all of which suit lung types. Now there is more nutrients, at least in case of macronutrients, but also more toxins and more calorie dense foods, all of which are a struggle for lung types. So, and if they try and eat like normal people do, if they are one of those people who, although they tend to be a little bit more independent thinking, or other things being equal, there's obviously a lot of other factors than constitution. And so if they end up being the kind of person who listens to authority and does what everyone else does, and they eat a normal diet like everyone else does, they will tend to get very sick and try a lot of things that don't work.
Yeah, it's kind of the perfect storm. It's like, well, I don't understand. I'm doing what everybody tells me, and it's right there, but it's just not working. Yeah, and it's having a negative effect. This next question comes from episode 19 with Grant Generu on vitamin A, and it comes from Yum Kitchen 241. The one question that I can't get answered is the fact that liver and organ meats have been traditionally given to pregnant women in cultures throughout history, and the tribes that ate a lot of organ meats had strong bones and no dental caries. No dental caries maybe. Does anyone have an explanation for this?
I think it is caries. I think that's
caries.
What they refer to as the holes.
Right.
From infections. Yeah. No one can answer that. I mean, Dr. Smith, I think, did a whole episode answering that, citing a lot of stuff. I assume this person is has Dr. Weston Price's book and maybe research foundation in mind. He's the dentist who traveled the world looking at all kinds of indigenous tribes. There were more of them at the time. I think it was like 100 years ago. And looking at their diets and measuring their teeth and stuff like that and general health. And he saw a big correlation between these people living indigenously who were eating a traditional diet and health of their mouth and gums and teeth and general health. And, there are even a few examples of like identical twins where one of them lived a Western lifestyle, Western diet, and one of them didn't. And, you can see like the difference it made to them health-wise. So he came to the conclusion that there must be certain nutrients missing from a modern diet that were more abundant in these indigenous diets, and that was the problem. Like with all these things, I'm sure that was partially true, but I think it also may have been overstated a little. There was a lot of stuff that wasn't understood then. I mean, for instance, I believe he refers to this thing called factor X as this nutrient that he identified, but he, wasn't even known by science at the time. That was later identified as vitamin K2, for instance. So just to give you an idea of how long ago it was. And so, just as an example, one theory that I heard is perhaps the reason that people's mouths and gums and teeth were so much worse with the Western diet was not maybe primarily nutrients, it's because of how much chewing was involved in a traditional indigenous diet versus a standard American diet, the SAD diet, whatever, standard Western diet, where there's very, very little chewing comparison. And there's certainly been shown that a lot of chewing, especially from a young age, is a factor. Another thing which I think the Weston Price Foundation at least does focus on is like when people are eating foods that they're allergic to, then it, especially as children, it causes like congestion, and then that kind of alters breathing, and that ends up changing the shape of the mouth and stuff like that. So I'm just giving those two as examples of alternative theories. So this idea that the reason why indigenous people were so much healthier is purely down to diet in terms of nutrients missing, I think is incomplete. And I think there's other stuff that hasn't been focused on, maybe even known. But if you just think about, and this is why I said lifestyle and diet, not just diet, think about the impact of a lifestyle with everything we understand now, whether it's like sunlight exposure, grounding, EMF radiation, circadian rhythm entrainment. Like, even in the case of those twins, say, that you had in this book, like, what was the difference in lifestyle other than diet? Like, they must have been having a pretty different life if one of them was, chewing on whale fat all day, and one of them was eating like a standard Western diet. Like, other than just diet, there was probably a lot of differences there. And so I think, all of that was probably underemphasized, and we've realized recently how big a difference all of that makes as well. I say all that to say, because the kind of fundamental presupposition of that person's question is that the reason those tribes were so healthy is because of the diet they ate, right? I think that's what I heard. And so I'm just trying to point out that there may well be a lot more to it than that. The other thing, and I just said this in the answer to the previous question, kind of I alluded to it, but I'll say it properly here. Traditionally, throughout most of our evolution, as far as we know, unless there was some Atlantis or something, but as far as mainstream science is concerned, the vast majority of our ancestors, the vast majority of the time, their primary occupation, as for most mammals still to this current day in the wild, is that there's not enough food. There's not enough nutrients. Remember, until recently, there was no refrigerators. There was no, even, like, you can salt meat and preserve it for quite a while, but where do you store it? There was no cleaning equipment. Like, it was all very challenging to get enough food throughout the year, especially if you didn't live near the equator, like, the winter season, right? It's very difficult to get enough food. And so a fundamental preoccupation of humans throughout known history, and also, as I said, wild mammals in most environments to this day, is getting enough nutrients. And so organ meats are dense in nutrients. Now, one of the things that's not been a fundamental preoccupation throughout most of our history is avoiding toxicity. I mean, yes, it has, like, obviously there would be like ancestral knowledge, like, don't eat that plant, don't eat that mushroom, all of that kind of stuff. But there wasn't this kind of obsession of, like, oh, there's toxins everywhere. There's toxins in all the food we eat. There's toxins in the air. There's toxins. Like, there would be, don't drink from that river. Don't, go there, maybe where there's smoke. Don't eat that plant. But, like, the idea of living in a world where everything you touch, everything you eat, everything you drink, everything you're surrounded by is toxic is a pretty new concept, because it just wasn't that true until recently. It's so outside their remit that when people get ill, they thought it was, demons or a curse or whatever, right? That's how far away from their thinking it was. So, and as I say, to some degree, justifiably, there were at least, maybe there was still quite a lot of toxic exposure for our ancestors, but they would have been like mycotoxins, for instance. Molds have not exactly come out of nowhere, but they would be molds that we're kind of adapted to. So the problem in our last 100 years is that we have just, I think it's at least hundreds of thousands, might be millions of toxins that are new, that our bodies never had to deal with before. So I say all that to say, in our current day and age, at least for people who are not, very poor in a developing country, we have access to enough nutrients. You could argue there's enough in the food, but, you can always buy supplements with, pure nutrients in, like your zinc and all the rest of it. So, like, nutrients are relatively easy to get. Toxins are relatively difficult to avoid. They're almost everywhere. And so, while, let's say 200 years ago, let's go, way before the invention of the electric light bulb or anything, while 200 years ago, it was difficult to get enough nutrients. Let's say before, industrial agriculture, that's really what changed it. But before industrial agriculture, it was difficult for most people most of the time to get enough nutrients. And so if the nutrients came with a bunch of toxins, no problem. Like, the body's not overloaded with toxins, it'll just deal with them. So I think that is why. And I think then it switched, right? And now it's like nutrients are much easier to get, even though, yes, I understand our food has less nutrients overall. Still, there is an abundance of food. There is abundance of nutrients in isolated forms. So it's still easier than it was for the majority of our ancestors, just because they didn't have enough food, even if the food was more nutritious. And so, yeah, I think that's a distinction. So that's a distinction why traditionally for thousands of years they would have used those foods. I guess I'm answering that question with what I've just said. And then why maybe 100 years ago they looked healthier when there were maybe some more toxins still. When Dr. Price was doing his research, that's answered in the first part, right? There may have been a lot of other factors going on.
Yeah, that's, really makes you think about that, and understanding why you would think with our food sources and where we are today in our modern civilized world that we wouldn't have as many of those issues and those troubles. But when you look at as you've just described it, you're like, okay, well, it makes sense. It makes sense.
It's a novel toxins. Yeah, I mean, infectious diseases are down a lot. The average life expectancy has gone up. This is the people who tout, modern medicine and modern science. The average life expectancy has gone up as far as we know. And a lot of it, and, various things are thanked for that and that are maybe not accurate. But from what I've seen in terms of statistics, what really did make the difference was sanitation and nutrition. So just being able to drink clean water, being able to wash, between defecating and eating, your hands, all of these kind of things, or preparing someone else's food, even more importantly, like all of these things made a big difference. People not going between handling dead bodies and then giving birth to a child, all of that kind of stuff, like that all made a big difference to, average life expectancy. So infectious disease has gone down a lot. I think mainly due to those two factors, mainly the sanitation, then also the nutrition is pretty significant. But yeah, the reason that we're not suddenly so much healthier, and in fact why the average life expectancy has stalled, and in fact some countries like the US has actually gone down again from the peak that it was, is the toxin issue. So it's like we did solve one issue quite well, which is the infectious disease issue, but we created another one that so far on average we're not dying as young as we used to, but our quality of life is really diminished. And it is going down. And if something isn't reversed, who knows? We may start having an average life expectancy exactly like they did 200 years ago soon, which was pretty appallingly low.
Yeah, well, hopefully there's a turnaround on that one.
Yeah. I'm doing my best to do my part on
yes,
it by
exactly.
raising awareness of all these things. I don't think you'll mind me saying this. I had a conversation with Jacob, and he said he listened to one of my episodes that was not about his formula, and it was when I talked about the root cause of the health epidemic, and I said that the fundamental root cause is faulty thinking, and he agreed with that, which was interesting to me because obviously he's very focused on his nutrients and toxins and all the rest of it, but yeah, we had a point of we both see it that way because fundamentally that is the issue, and I won't repeat all of that again, but that's quite an important episode. I think if you just want to fix your whatever, then maybe not. But if you really want to understand like the whole world and why things are in such a state, if I've just depressed you with what I said over the last 10 minutes, then watch that episode because I think it really does provide the solution to how to turn things around, as well as give some positive news about, as you said, things are getting better, maybe.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's exactly why we show up here, is to help everybody to understand that, yeah, there are better things that we can be doing so that you can, live optimally and not have to deal with as much of what's coming from over here and that faulty thinking and everything else and the toxins and all of that. There are things to do. So it's not to get depressed. It's not to get down. There are absolutely free things, expensive things, many things that an individual can do to really put themselves on the path to health and wellness.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned free things. I think we did at least one episode, but I think we did more than one, which is like stuff you can do that costs zero money, right? Because I know a lot of stuff I talk about does cost money, but a lot of the best things you can do for your health are actually free, but they require discipline or, effort. But absolutely, it doesn't have to cost any money if you are time rich but money poor. You can arguably it's even better than if you have plenty of money and no time. Like you can definitely turn things around with health challenges in most cases if you're really just committed to doing the right things. But again, you got to know what the right things are, and it's not a one size fits all, and that's where it gets complicated and difficult. But as you said, Krissy, that's why we're doing this, to try and give as much free information as possible so people can work it out what it is for them.
Again, as always, Elwin, thank you for answering these questions, and thank you to our lovely listeners for providing them so that we can do episodes like this. Because as Elwin said at the start of the beginning of this episode, that was one of his favorite things to do for the people, or to listen to for the people that he was really interested in. So before we close, Elwin, anything else you would like to say to our listeners?
Yeah, thank you for supporting the podcast. Thank you for supporting our sponsors or, subscribing. Thank you for rating, reviewing, sharing, commenting, all those great things you do. With comments, they may feature an episode like this if you leave them, but they may inspire whole episodes as well. So just know it's not a waste of time. Someone's listening, someone is paying attention. And also, sometimes we don't feature them in these kind of episodes, but sometimes people suggest things to me about things that I should look into. I appreciate that as well. Feel free, leave it in the comments. If I can tell it's obviously just promotional material, I might delete it. But if I can see that it's sincere, it doesn't have to be someone else's work. If you can even share your own work if you want. As long as I get sincerity from it, then please do feel free to share in the comments as well anything that you think is worth paying attention to.
As always, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. You may have noticed I recommended a few different videos in that episode, and one of the ones I'd recommend is just here, if you want to click there, or another one I recommend is just below, if you want to click on that one and watch that next.